Hey everybody, it's Bobby LaMarco, the Fantasy Football X Factor, checking back in as promised with the opportunities analysis. So in today's episode, we're going to talk quickly about what the opportunity analysis is, where it kind of originated, and how it could have helped predict 2019 breakouts, guys that could have been sleepers, or even guys that could emerge to move up a tier into the elite category. So right off the bat, let's talk a little bit about the backstory. So I was evaluating, just kind of recapping 2018 and 2019 and understanding where I ranked guys. And I like to reevaluate myself before I go into 2020. So the first thing I looked at was Michael Thomas. It was driving me crazy because I had probably a block of 8 elite wide receivers last year. Michael Thomas was number 8. And the reason why ADP had him at 4 and I was a little bit lower on him was because of the fact that he had a better first half than second half in 2018. So, of course, flash forward, we're able to see that he finished number 1 overall, and he was dominant. So I was trying to get a better understanding of why. Like, what was the missing link there? The New Orleans Saints didn't have any, wasn't at the top of vacated targets. Michael Thomas was a very good player, but at the same time, he wasn't number 1 in yards per route run. He wasn't number 1 in anything, essentially. So he didn't stand out to be the true number 1. So what I did is I started looking at a new statistic called fantasy points per dropback. So essentially taking wide receiver production and tight end production and seeing it compared to the team's dropbacks. And in that statistic, Michael Thomas was number 1. So the New Orleans Saints actually were in the low 500s in dropbacks in 2018, and where they had a big jump up in 2019. Now, I put together a spreadsheet of the last 7 seasons to see what is the average dropbacks for all these teams. So of the last 7 years, it's 623 dropbacks. And what we do see is when a team's below 580, they typically have a regression back to that 623 in a positive way. And the same thing goes with teams that are over 700 in the 680, 700 mark. So that was one area where that increased volume allowed Michael Thomas to make a huge jump in targets, which vaulted him into the number 1 wide receiver, because in 2018, he actually was the number 1 fantasy producer when it came to producing fantasy points based on the team's overall dropbacks. So that increased volume jumped him up. So that's just something that got me excited. I'm like, okay, so what other guys were impacted? Guys like Tyler Lockett, for example, that we could have seen in the analysis. So just to give you a quick breakdown on what I put together for this was the last 7 seasons, there was 43 teams that was under 580 dropbacks. 27 of those actually had at least 45 or more dropbacks the following season. So that's 63%. So that's a pretty good number that teams actually had a significant increase. And overall, the increase was 55 dropbacks. So of everyone, the average increase from teams that are under 580 got an increase of 55 dropbacks on average. But the impact here is that most teams do see a positive regression and have more volume. So we can apply some of that into the next year and see what teams in 2019 will see some organic growth in dropbacks, so we can predict some guys that might get increased volume without having available targets per se. But that being said, I'm bundling the two for this analysis. So the other part of this is going to be vacated targets. So teams like last year, like the Detroit Lions, the Buffalo Bills, the Oakland Raiders, had a boatload of available targets. So what I did is essentially I merged those two stats together and come up with a new number to see how many vacated targets are really available. Let's talk a little bit about the guys that we could have predicted based on this model. So the first thing you're going to see here is that, Darren Waller, Oakland Raiders. And at 429, there were so many available targets. They already were right around average in 2018, but there were so many available targets that Darren Waller was destined to step in because of Jared Cook's departure and his focal point being a part of that offense. The next team on the list is Detroit Lions. Now, the Lions, for example, Kenny Golladay wasn't a low pick. He was 4th, 5th round pick, and he was able to take that leap because of the increase in available targets. And Marvin Jones, actually, when the first half of the season, was a valuable wide receiver too. So we saw that is immediate impact based on the availability of targets, increased volume. The next team on the list is the Buffalo Bills. And the Buffalo Bills, this is John Brown. I mean, John Brown was able to emerge as the clear number 1. The Bills had a boatload of available targets. So that was great news. A guy like John Brown was able to emerge. Now, keep in mind, I did not update these numbers for 2019 because I wanted to see if I didn't know anything about 2019 and I was just going into 2019 last year based on 2018 data, would have been helpful, and clearly it was. So some of these numbers are actually, if I updated with what happened, they're actually pretty close. We did see a lot of increases. Like, for example, a couple more teams I want to highlight are the Miami Dolphins, Seattle Seahawks. So you can see that they didn't have necessarily the most available targets, but they actually had such low passing volume in 2018 that they had some organic growth in 2019. And Miami actually had way more than 102. They actually had like a 700 plus dropbacks last year, which helped Devontae Parker, helped Mike Gesicki take a leap. And the other team, of course, is the Seattle Seahawks. So one of the key factors here is not just a guy emerging, but allowing a clear starter, a clear fantasy stud to keep his targets and his status while another guy emerges. And that's a perfect example in Seattle, where Tyler Lockett actually had very similar points per game from 2018 and 2019, but it allowed DK Metcalf to emerge as a solid fantasy asset and average double-digit fantasy points. So we saw this, for example, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who are on this list as well. So taking this information and applying it to 2020 is something we're going to do in my next post. I'll touch on guys that we can look at based on vacated targets heading into next year, but also what teams are positively going to be affected by getting more volume. So this is kind of the thought based on my opportunities analysis. Leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think to let me know if I'm losing my mind here or if this is something you think could really work for us. So thanks for joining me again, guys. This is Bobby Mark of the Fantasy Football X Factor. Follow me on Twitter at FFXFactor and also follow me on here at Fantasy Football X Factor. Thanks for joining again, guys. We'll talk soon.